today we are talking about the role of a chaplain in hospice, and I'm joined by one of Hospice of the Chesapeake chaplains, Renee Norwood. Renee, thanks for taking time to talk to me today.
You're so welcome. I'm honored to be here.
It's great to see you.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the role of a chaplain. When you go to speak to someone and you say, hey, hi, I'm a chaplain with Hospice of the Chesapeake, what's the typical response that you get?
Well, oftentimes, first of all, they'll respond and say, thank you so much for calling. And I kind of get a conglomerate of different responses. Sometimes they'll say, oh, I already have a pastor. I already have a pastor that's following me. Thank you very much. Then others will say, well, what do you do? I already had a chaplain or someone visit me in the hospital. So
Okay.
Then I explain, well, there is a difference between the chaplain. Now that you're on our service, we provide our chaplain, I'm the chaplain, and provide spiritual support, because sometimes they'll say, oh, well, I'm not very religious, and I said, well, spirituality is different from religion, although sometimes persons it'll encompass, their religion will encompass their spirituality.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, so do people get confused then? Like, what's the difference between a chaplain and a pastor? Like, okay. Can you talk a little bit about?
Yeah, and I usually just say, well, think about it. It is a pastoral kind of entity where I'm providing more spiritual support, reassurance, helping you to cope with your illness now that you've come aboard our hospice program. And so I am there to just be with you through the journey and providing that spiritual support. So that might mean talking with you through it, having you to express your feelings and how you're coping along. And so in that way, it's a pastoral kind of support, but it's more congruent with your spiritual support and your spiritual beliefs and foundation.
Got it. So it's bigger than just one denomination or just one religion in particular. It's looking at spirituality as a larger entity and not just one. Okay.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
Exactly.
So you could provide chaplain support for someone who's not a Christian, or someone who is a Buddhist, or someone who is Jewish. Like okay.
Because it's more so dealing with how you're coping and what you use and where you find that your spirit is reverbed or kind of supported. And so that
and I would think we'd guess people are pretty reflective at the end of life regarding their relationship with their spirituality, because it's a time to be that way.
Yeah. And oftentimes, they are just when they come aboard hospice, they're just, getting used to accepting this disease process. And so part of my role initially is just to meet them where they are, to develop spirit rapport with them. So I may talk out of the box, so to speak. How are you doing? What kind of work did you do? Just to kind of meet them where they are and present myself as a person to them and someone that they can talk to. And then we might get into the spiritual aspect of how they're coping with their disease. So more than anything, I'm trying to meet them where they are and have them feel like they can trust talking to me.
Right. Just another support person on their hospice care team.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense.
Exactly.
So I'm curious, as a female, as a woman, I would think this is probably more of a male dominated position. What's that like? Do you share with me a little bit about being a woman as a chaplain?
Well, it actually has kind of evolved. When I first started, I was a chaplain in a hospital where I started my journey. And so I do remember, but this was before coming into hospice, but just being in the hospital, and people would say, you don't look like a chaplain. And so I said, well, what does a chaplain look like? And so that's kind of what I get, when I first initially will introduce myself. But then as I provide support and just be who I am as a person, as a female, trying to meet them where they are, they seem to, be more open to
be able
discuss.
to reply and respond to
Yeah,
you just as a person.
just
That
as a
makes
person.
sense.
Then I kind of slide into their spirituality and what gives them strength and how they're coping.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah, I
have
can
to meet
see
them
that.
first where they are, and that's, I'm not sure if a male necessarily has to do that, but I find that for a female, oftentimes we kind of have to get our foot in the door first, and then, or at least for me,
Right.
and then they'll be more open to talking with it, because oftentimes they'll say, oh, well, at first, no, I didn't want it, but now, it seems like now that they've talked to me and they feel a little more comfortable, they say, well, you can come by. Sure, I'll take services.
Right, right. Well, yeah, and it's just one more person to talk to, another perspective, and I would think that would be helpful and supportive. Yeah.
Exactly.
So we touched a little bit on it, but the whole religious versus spiritual versus denomination. I mean, I think people who maybe aren't really familiar with all those concepts, can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what's the difference?
Yeah, well, I find that spirituality encompasses their whole person and
Okay.
what feeds their spirit, what gives them strength outside of, because as we know, I always tell them we are physical, emotional, and spiritual beings. So we try to feed the whole person. So oftentimes, if your physical, sense is taken care of, the nurse is coming out and she's helping you and you're not in any pain. And then the social worker, she's taking care of you emotionally and family and getting that all, coordinated. But then it's spiritually, then how do you cope with it? Where do you put all of this? Where do you find your strength? And so that necessarily doesn't have to do with religion. However, sometimes persons will connect the two because they are, they do have a religion or a religious foundation or denomination that they've grown up with. And
Right.
so that's where they feed off of. And then I let them know that I'm kind of like an extra team, or an extra set of eyes or ears, or someone that you can bounce off how you're feeling, because persons will say, well, I do have a pastor, but he's not really able to visit or come by. And so that's partly why I say that I'm an extra team member that you can bounce your spirituality. And so it has nothing to do with necessarily religion, although your religion may be in the midst of what you're believing and how you're coping.
Right, right.
Because religion happens to be sometimes, denominational, and it deals with all of the rituals that you are, involved with, sacraments and that sort of thing. But then I try to be open to whatever they would feed their spirit.
Right. So you just really talk about spiritually as a bigger concept, not just a specific thing that people can connect with a ritual, with their religion, but
Right.
what feeds them.
Yes, because I had
Nurtures
one
them.
patient that, it was nothing to do with religion. He didn't believe in God. He didn't believe in any of that, but he believed in nature. So oftentimes we would have our visits outside on his patio where he could look outside and see nature. And so he realized that came from somewhere. And when he looks at things grow, it feeds his spirit. He used to love to work in the yard. And so when he saw things grow from season to season to season,
Right.
it let him know. And then we kind of, segue that into how does that relate to what you're going through physically, and coping with your disease.
Right.
It's a process
Yeah.
and it's a growth. And I always let them know that although we can't take the disease away, we can walk with you through it. And that's what I'm here for.
Right. In addition to the person who is dying, you also provide support for family members. Can you talk a little bit about what you do for them?
Yes, exactly. And oftentimes when I provide support for the family, it's helping them to try to care for their loved ones, try to bring any kind of or diminish or decrease maybe some conflict that they may have in coping with the illness. How do I talk to my mom? How do I talk to my dad? And sometimes I let them know that sometimes the ministry of presence is so awesome.
Ooh, I like that, Renee. The ministry of presence, like just being there.
Yeah, you don't have to say anything, just watching TV with them. And I let them know that those are the memories. So what you do now from here on out, those are the memories that are going to be lasting. So anything, I tell them that some things, as they say, will be thrown into the sea of forgetfulness, never to remember it anymore. So whatever might give you some closure, if it's conflict resolution, if it's some things that you may have grown up with that, you wanted to say, I'm sorry, or sometimes just a look, just a smile, just a holding of their hand, it will say a conglomerate of things.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how I deal with that.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And I'm thinking family members are going through, relationships are complicated.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing there's all sorts of emotional things going on, for families as well.
Yeah. And one of the hardest things sometimes for families is seeing their loved ones decline over a period of time. And so I can only, let them know that, I empathize with them, and it is hard, and I acknowledge their feelings and let them know that it is hard to see that, but those also are going to be the memories that are going to be lasting, because we do have some patients that come in, they may have 3 or 4 days and you don't have long, so I let them know that these are precious moments. And even when person may be actually, dying, actually what we call actively dying,
right.
Not able to talk anymore or anything, I will have what we call maybe a bedside service. So the person may be in the bed, not able to speak anything, and I'll have the family members say what they want to say, because I let them know that the last thing to go is the hearing. Right. So whatever you say, it will let you know that your loved one can hear you. So I can't tell you how many times I've had some wonderful, very striking, very emotional things that are being said to their loved one. And I let them know that that's what's going to minister to you when they're gone, because you'll know that you were able to say that and they were able to hear you.
Yeah. And I think this is one of the reasons why it's so important to try and help educate people that receiving hospice services sooner rather than later can be so helpful for them, for the family members, for everybody involved.
Exactly. I let them know that, a lot of times people, when you say hospice, is to so many people it's a bad word. Right. But then persons who've had hospice and after things have gone, the trajectory and even end of life, they say, boy, I wish I had you all sooner, and I let them know right away that just because you're in hospice doesn't mean you're going to die tomorrow.
Right.
You know what I mean? So we're here for comfort. That's what we're all about. It's comfort measures, and one of our main goals is to make sure that you're comfortable and deal with your pain. And then everything else kind of falls into place.
Right.
For the whole person.
Yeah. So I'm curious about you as a chaplain. If you can tell me a little bit about how your own journey, how did you get there, and what's sort of your history been?
Yeah. Well, I've always grown up in the church, and so I have that foundation for my personal support. And so I went through, I was a music teacher years ago, and so I've grown up in the church. I sang in the choir, I directed choirs and so forth. But then as a music teacher, unfortunately, after 10 years of service as a teacher in Prince George's County, actually, I tore my vocal cord. So I had to retire from teaching. So I didn't know what else I was going to do. But through it all, and through growing through my church, through my pastor and ministers, and to make a long story short, I went through seminary, and I found that this actually met who I am as a person and my person. So it still was in the helping profession. Right. And so out of that growth and out of going to school, I found the position of a hospice chaplain, and so I applied. And it was in a newspaper article, a newspaper job listing. and I met all the requirements. I had a degree and all of that. And so actually I went to the interview and they hired me that day.
That's
And
awesome.
I continued to go, of course, through the process and even through my church. So I was it was a dual position, so to speak. I was going through my church ordination process, but also working in hospice, and they all, coupled together. And then they think of me now as the singing chaplain. So although I had to retire from teaching because I tore my vocal cord, but God gave me my voice back enough to be able to sing one-on-one. So oftentimes, as I leave patients, I'll ask them, would they like me to pray with them or even sing a song? So I have one patient that she won't let me get off the phone unless we sing a song. And she said, what song are you going to sing for me today?
And what a great gift to be able to give people, especially as you were saying at someone's end of life, hearing a lot of other senses aren't available to them.
Yes, exactly.
But they can still hear.
Yeah, and I find and what really ministers to people is a lot of times those gifts of the hymns or the songs that they've used to. Even I go way back, even if it's Yes, Jesus Loves Me or whatever.
Right.
It is a simple song. All of a sudden, they may not be able to talk, but then they start singing.
Right.
That side of the brain
Yeah.
starts, coming to pass. And so that's what ministers to the family, because they remember those special moments.
Right. And I love how you said too about the person that you had worked with that didn't consider themselves religious, but was able to connect to nature spiritually.
Yes.
Like there's some sort of connection, whether it's music or nature, there's something that you can kind of walk with the person and find that connection that's going to help comfort them.
Yes, exactly.
That's so awesome.
Oh.
Well, Renee, thank you so much for taking time today to talk to me about being a chaplain. I think you have such an amazing gift, and I'm so grateful that you shared with me.
Oh, you're so welcome. It was just, as I said, I consider this role to be such an honor, especially coming from my background and doing what I do. And so people say, how can you do this? And I think, how not?
Right. Right. Well, I'm grateful. Thank you.
Thank you.
I also want to make sure to thank the John and Kathy Belcher Institute for their generous support of the community education programs at Hospice of the Chesapeake. Thanks.